Hey everyone, it's Zack Beck. The United States government has been spending a lot of money over the last year. It started with the CARES Act back in March of 2020, when stimulus payments and other measures were put into place to deal with the pandemic. Then we had the American Rescue Plan, which is a $1.8 trillion piece of legislation. Additional stimulus checks were sent out, additional measures were helped to protect businesses and other individuals associated with the fallout from the pandemic and hopefully setting us on a better trajectory moving forward. And now we have two new pieces of legislation being proposed by President Biden. The first is the American Jobs Plan. This is an infrastructure bill that's going to focus primarily on roads, bridges, ports, and airports, and digital infrastructure here in the United States at a total of $1.8 trillion. And now he just released the American Families Plan. This is a $1.5 trillion piece of legislation that seeks to expand education as well as childcare and family and medical leave, all while raising taxes on some of the highest income earners here in the United States of America. So what I want to do in this video is break down in detail what is in the American Families Plan, how it will impact you directly, and more importantly, if this is actually going to become law in the future. So let's take our time, dive into the details, and jump into it right now. As previously mentioned, President Biden proposed the American Families Plan during a speech to a joint session of Congress. Now, this is an important piece of legislation that has a lot in it that will impact you and others directly. So what I want to do right now is go into a couple of these different categories so we can understand what's in this bill. And the first thing I believe is important for us to be aware of is that he's looking to expand childcare and keep it actually the cost a little bit lower for most individuals, primarily for those in the low and middle income categories. And what he's proposing in this piece of legislation is that those in those different income categories would pay no more than 7% of their income on childcare. And this would actually be a significant impact on a lot of people because those who have children understand the costs of childcare are significant. So that's one piece of that legislation. On that note, you might be asking yourself, do I qualify for this benefit? And the answer would be, as it's currently written, yes, if you make no more than 1.5% of the median income in your state, then yes, you would qualify for this benefit of paying no more than 7% towards childcare costs. An additional element of this bill is that he's proposing making community college tuition free, and by doing so, he would allocate $109 billion towards this, and what would happen is the federal government would cover up to 75% of the cost for your community college tuition, and then states would pick up the remaining 25%. Not saying this is a good or a bad proposal, but it would be interesting to see that more people would have the option of being able to go to college and not worry about the burden associated with that. And on that note, you might be asking yourself, well, what about student loan debt? Is he going to cancel that, or is Congress going to do so? You might have heard of proposals coming from Senator Schumer or Senator Elizabeth Warren who've said that they want to cancel up to $50,000 of student loan debt. And what President Biden has said up until this point is no. He is comfortable with canceling up to $10,000 worth of student loan debt for those who've already gone through the process of attending university. So from that standpoint alone, he has also said that he does not want to do so through executive action. He'd prefer an act of Congress because he says that that is less likely for it to get overturned at a future administration. So from that standpoint alone, as it relates to colleges, we're looking at potentially community colleges being free for those who are wanting to attend them. And then in addition to that, when it comes to student loan forgiveness, there's possibly going to be a $10,000 cancellation at some point in time in the future. But as of right now, that is not part of this legislation, but it is something that is continuously being discussed. The American Families Plan would also provide up to 12 weeks of guaranteed paid medical or family leave. Now, this is something that isn't very common here in the United States of America. It's more common in countries throughout Europe, but basically what it is that if you have maybe like a death of a loved one, you experience an illness yourself, or maybe you want to take time off because of a birth of a new child or something to that extent, you could basically take time away from work and it would actually be paid. And the way this would actually structurally work is the government would reimburse your employer so that way they pay your wages. And what they would do is they'd pay you up to $4,000 a month, or at least 2/3 of your monthly salary, and they would be able to do so for up to 12 weeks. Now, this is an interesting proposal, but also costs a lot of money, about $225 billion. So what we're finding is that this is another element of this, and people are fairly interested in this, but it's something that is not as commonly practiced here in the United States right now. President Biden is also proposing universal preschool. What this is basically for children's age 3 and 4, the government would actually pay for them to go to preschool. And this would save the average American family about $13,000. And from that standpoint alone, it could be very significant, but that also shows that it's going to cost a lot. There's actually going to be an allocation proposal of $200 billion to make this become effective. Now that we have an understanding of some of the new details associated with this bill, what I want to talk about now are some of the elements associated with this proposal that are actually from previous relief measures that now they want to make permanent. And the first would be the child tax credit. And what happened is the previous relief measure allowed a child tax credit to move forward where basically children under the age of 6, parents could claim a $3,600 tax credit. And for anyone aged 6 to 17, those children, those families would be able to claim a $3,000 tax credit, up from the original $2,000 previously. What this new bill is proposing is to actually make that permanent. And the way that this would actually work is that individuals making less than $75,000 a year would qualify. Those who are head of a household making $112,500 would also qualify, or joint filers making up to $150,000 would qualify. So the way that this would actually work is that individuals would actually receive up to half of their payments in monthly installments moving forward, beginning in July of 2021 all the way through the end of the year. And then they would actually be able to claim the remaining half of their benefit on their future taxes. And by doing so, what they're doing is allowing people to be able to pay their monthly expenses and giving them money to do so. And this is an interesting proposal because when we look at this alongside stuff like universal pre-K, community college being free, and then medical and family leave, we're seeing a trajectory that America might be going in that is a little bit more along the lines of what we see commonly done in Europe. So it's actually kind of a new model for the United States. It's very different than what we've had previously. Not to say this is a good or a bad thing, it's just different direction that we potentially could be heading in. And when you factor in that this is going to be a substantial change that has the potential to benefit a lot of people, and I've talked about some of those benefits already, one thing that we haven't talked about yet is how much this is going to cost and who is actually going to pay for it at the end of the day. So I want to break down those details right now because those could also impact you as well. Before I jump into this section, what I want to be really clear about is that I'm not here to take a side on this issue. I know people might have really strong feelings about, well, we should really tax the rich, or we should cut spending here, or people need to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps, or we need to make sure that we're all pulling our own weight, or a rising tide lifts all boats. I understand all the arguments. I hear them all the time. And personally, as someone who is affiliated with myself in different directions politically before in the past, I understand where people come from on these issues. So I'm not here to tell you what is best, but I'm just going to tell you what is actually proposed right now as it currently stands. And what we're looking at right now is that the proposal of the American Families Plan is looking to be paid for by raising taxes on those in the higher income categories, primarily those in the top 1%. And what they're proposing in this bill is to actually raise the marginal tax rate all the way up to 39.6%. This was previously cut back in 2017 as part of the American Jobs and Tax Cuts Act that was passed by the previous administration, and now they're looking to undo that and raise that marginal tax rate up to 39.6%. One of the most effective ways that you can be prepared for this new proposal is if you tax the like button for the YouTube algorithm. I'm just kidding, but if you wouldn't mind smashing that like button, that would actually help the channel out a lot and mean a lot to myself. And also, it won't raise your taxes at all. It won't cost you any money. It should only help you to make well and wise informed decisions moving forward so you can achieve your goals. The most significant area where this proposal is looking to raise revenue is actually by doubling the long-term capital gains tax rate. And this is a significant change because right now, for those who actually invest into the stock market or invest into other assets throughout the economy, what they do is when you have a benefit of you actually hold an asset for a long term, generally over 1 year, you pay a lower tax rate on that. Whereas if you say do a short-term sale, let's say you buy a share of GameStop, you buy it today, you sell it tomorrow, the next thing you know, you're having to pay a higher tax rate on that. It's called short-term capital gains, generally taxed as almost normal income. So what you're gonna find when you do a long-term capital gains, you only pay 20%, plus if you're in a certain income category above $1 million, you'd pay 3.8% tax for Medicare. But generally what you're finding is that now in this proposal, they're looking to double that. So people would actually have no different benefit from a short-term capital gain or a long-term capital gain. And this would basically raise the rate from 20% right now all the way up to 39.6%, plus that 3.8% Medicare surcharge tax. So we're looking at a 43.4% total tax rate for the federal taxes that someone making above $1 million would pay on long-term capital gains. This doesn't even factor in what you pay at the state level. I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, because obviously this only impacts a very small portion of those who make that kind of income, but we really want to be careful when we're looking at disincentivizing anyone from wanting to invest, because that's one of the great benefits we have here in the United States, is people being able to have free access to the market to be able to invest and hopefully achieve their long-term goals. We obviously want as equal of an area for us to be able to do so where we are playing by the same rules. but we don't want equal outcome. You know, that's only going to be determining on the risk factors and risk tolerance that you have. So it's just something that you want to think about. This could have implications for the stock market long term. I know I will remain invested and continue my long-term strategy irrespective of this piece of legislation, but I just wanted to share this with you because it could actually have a dramatic impact on people, and we could see obviously taxes going up on those in the higher income category, but that could potentially impact those in the middle income categories because we might see stock valuations and prices go down. We might see other areas of the economy affected by this due to lack of liquidity. So there's a couple of things you want to be aware of, but just something I wanted to point out in this piece of legislation, but it's a benchmark element of this because we cannot have all of these other benefits that I talked about previously without being able to pay for them somehow. So it's understandable that they're putting this proposal forward because obviously this is an area where they can bring in a lot of additional revenue to pay for those other programs. And obviously this is a big piece of legislation. There's a lot associated with it. There are some good things, there are some bad things, and it's really depending upon your perspective. But what we want to be aware of is that obviously this is just a proposal. And from a political perspective, I want to share that with you because I believe sometimes we make irrational decisions, especially when it comes to our investing or our decision making when it comes to how we're going to allocate our money just based off of what we hear in the news. And the reason for this is when this proposal originally was put forward, the stock market reacted negatively. People started selling off assets, were concerned that taxes were going to get raised, and from that standpoint, I understand why, because that was what was being proposed. But you also want to think about the fact of whether or not this will become law. And that is because right now, the way that the government is set up in the United States is the Democrats control the House of Representatives, but then they barely control the Senate because there are right now 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans in the Senate. And the tie-breaking vote on all those measures would be Vice President Kamala Harris. And to get 50 Democrats to vote for this, President Biden needs to get more conservative Democrats such as Kristen Sinema, as well as Joe Manchin and others on board to actually pass this, and that would be to be able to pass it through budget reconciliation. If he wants to get over the filibuster, he will need 60 votes, which means that he would at least need all of his Democratic senators to vote for it, so he would have 50 there, but then you need 10 Republican senators to join him. And what we've already seen happening is that when he proposed the American Jobs Plan, which I created a video about a little while ago, that was originally a $1.8 trillion proposal, and now he's negotiating with the Republican senators as well as Democratic senators, and they're already scaling the spending back down to about $600 billion. So what we're going to see, I believe, is something similar with this proposal. And part of that too is I think it's going to be very difficult for the capital gains tax rate for long-term capital gains to actually get changed. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on all of those senators from those who donate to their campaigns to actually be able to make that change. So I don't know if that's likely to become law, but it might. It may come at a little bit of a higher rate or it might just be modified slightly. And then we also think about some of those other benefits we talked about previously, such as the universal pre-K, medical and family leave, and some of the free college tuition and all the other elements of that. Some of those might get changed around as well because this is going to be a negotiation. So maybe a few months down the road, probably by around the July timeframe, there might be a piece of legislation that is actually being put forward for a vote. And if that happens, it's probably going to be very different than what we're seeing right now. But it's important for us to be aware of where the proposal is right now, because if it does become law, it does stand to affect you directly, either in significant benefits or potentially in higher taxes. So you just want to be aware of that. And that's why I want to share that with you. With all that being said, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. If you wouldn't mind, please tap the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Help push this video to other people who might need to hear it. Furthermore, if you wouldn't mind, please subscribe to the channel. That would mean a lot to myself personally, as I do everything I can to create content that will make a positive impact in your life by encouraging you and myself to lead lives of meaning and purpose, all while maintaining balance and moderation. And feel free to comment down below. I'd love to interact with you, get to know you, do any research on your behalf, and help you make well and wise informed decisions moving forward. And if you do subscribe to the channel, please tap the notification bell. That will notify you every time I post a video, which I do on a weekly basis. Once again, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. I hope you have a wonderful day. Talk to you next time.